Chapter 8, Location Planning and Analysis. Location decisions are strategically important. They're closely tied to low cost or convenience to attract market share. They affect your capacity and flexibility. They represent a long-term commitment of resources. They affect investment requirements, operating cost, revenues, and operations. They impact your competitive advantage, and they have a real importance to supply chains. So some of your objectives in locations decisions, they're based on potential profit or cost and customer service. You want to find a number of acceptable locations from which to choose, and then you should consider your position in the supply chain. If you're at the end of the chain, then accessibility, customer demographics, traffic patterns, local customs are all important. If you're in the middle, you want to be near both suppliers and or markets. And if you're at the beginning, you probably want to be near the source of raw materials. The other consideration is web-based retail organizations are effectively independent of location. Although some, if you think of like Amazon, they've started to have same-day delivery in some cities, so those will need to have some location near that city. Some suppliers, web-based organizations, put their warehouse right next to like the FedEx hub or something like that. That way you can get your products later to FedEx and just get the outbound planes instead of the inbound planes too. So some options. So you have four options if you're considering location planning. The first is to expand the existing location. You could add new locations while retaining existing facilities. You could shut down one location and move to another. And then there's the fourth option, which is do nothing. So global locations, there's some facilitating factors. There's two factors that have really contributed to the attractiveness of globalization. One of them is trade agreements. Things like NAFTA, GATT, U.S.-China Trade Relations Act, EU and World Trade Organization efforts to facilitate trade. And then there's the technology piece of it. So there's been significant advances in communication and information technology which really help global locations. So managing global operations. So there's definitely some managerial implications. Language and cultural difference. You run the risk of miscommunication. You have to develop trust. There's different management styles in different cultures. And then there's the whole thing of corruption and bribery, which is prevalent in other cultures, but totally illegal here. There's increased travel costs. And then there's the challenges of managing operations that are far away. And then there's the whole level of technology resistance to technological change that may be an issue. And then the final thing is your domestic people may resist locating even temporarily. So you have this expert in your manufacturing, and why would he or she want to go to another country, their kids, their family, whatever? They want to be where they are. And oh, by the way, they're training someone to replace them. There's a lot of resistance there. So here's the procedure. So there's some steps here. You decide on the criteria you're going to use to evaluate alternatives. You identify important factors, location to markets or raw materials, And then you look at location alternatives. Identify the country or countries for the location, geographic region, and then you narrow it down to a small number of community alternatives, and then you identify the site alternatives among the community alternatives. And then you evaluate the alternatives and make a decision. So some considerations. So we talked about the nearness to raw materials. It's usually not a consideration. Customer access. This is prime consideration for restaurants and hotels. It's not an important consideration for service call centers. There's a tendency to be profit or revenue driven. So there's concern with demographics, competition, traffic volume, pattern, convenience. And then clustering. Similar types of businesses often locate near one another. So, if you're a restaurant, you might want to be near other restaurants so that, I know my wife and I, we're going out to eat and we're driving down the road, can't decide which place we're going to, but we head to the direction that there's 3 or 4 restaurants, and we'll decide as we're getting close. So if those restaurants weren't clustered, it wouldn't help with that consideration. So there's several techniques for evaluating alternatives. One is locational cost volume profit analysis. There's factor rating, transportation model, and center of gravity method. So here's the cost profit volume analysis. And this is really similar to what we were doing when we had factories, and you have fixed cost, variable cost per unit, and it varies depending on the location. So here you have location A, which has a fixed cost of $250,000 and $11 per unit. Location B, which has a fixed cost of $100,000 with $30,000 per unit. Location C, which is $150,000 with $20,000 per unit. And then location D, $200,000 with $35 per unit. And if you can graph each of those. So on the left side over here, the line starts with the fixed cost. So here's A. So the fixed cost, it was $250,000, and then the slope of that is $11 per unit. So essentially, what you want is the bottom. So in this case, if it's 0 to 5, option B is superior. And then you see that the lowest one here is C, from 5 to a little over 11. Option C is superior. And then if it's more than here, option A is superior. So now you can see that in this case, your forecast is important, because if you're not forecasting right, you're not going to have the right your location analysis will be off. So another is factor rating. So you pick your factors, and then you develop a weighting, and then you compare alternative 1 and alternative 2. You put down scores, 1 to 100. You have some kind of criteria, and then you get down to the end. And in this case, you see that alternative 1 has a total weighted score of 70.6, and alternative 2 has a total weighted score of 82.7. So in this case, alternative 2 wins in the factor rating. Okay, then there's the transportation. This is important for determining where you're going to put your warehouse, where are your shipping points, where are your supply points. So where are you going to put your warehouses, and which things are you going to put in which places? So this is sort of a cool little problem where you have your demand. You have your factory 1, 2, and 3, and your warehouse A, B, C, and D. And there's your demand, and there's your supply. And then you have a cost to ship. So up here, this is the cost to ship from the factory to warehouse A, and there it's 4. And so you can have this is a really cool math problem if you're an engineer, but it's actually an iteration. So you go through an initial iteration and you find an initial solution where you minimize the cost, and now you iterate that, and you get this in table 6. You have the initial solution, and then you end up with an improved solution. Now, in this case, this tells you how many or which items to ship to which warehouse to minimize the cost. And then there's the center of gravity method. So this is where you locate a distribution center in the middle of the center of gravity. So you just take the coordinates, and it's here you end up, these are the coordinates of each of your places, and then so the center of gravity of all of these is right here. So this is where you'd want to locate your distribution center. So the summary for Chapter 8, we talked about the need and nature of location decisions. There's global locations. There's a general procedure for making location decisions. And then you identify the country, region, community, site, service and retail locations, and then evaluating location alternatives with those 4 methods. So that's the end of Chapter 8, and this is the end of Session 3.